Hello, I'm Brownfield Ag News anchor reporter Ken Anderson, and I'm pleased to be hanging out today on Google Hangout with Frank Chen, a journalist with the Asia Times media outlet. Frank is based in Hong Kong. Frank and I first met this last fall when we were both participants in an Ag Innovations tour in Canada. And during that week together, I discovered that Frank is a political junkie who has an excellent grasp of geopolitics in the Asia-Pacific region and around the globe. We had a lot of fun visits during that week. Frank, it's good to talk to you again.
It's great to talk to you again, Ken. You are flattering me. I'm just a reporter scraping by. That's my profession, but I'm trying to provide a little bit more insight into the stories that I write.
Well, again, I appreciate your insight into that part of the world, and wanted to visit with you about the relationship between China and the U.S., which of course is in the headlines every day here in the U.S. And just as a background, you are a native of China, correct?
Yeah, I was born in China.
Yeah. So again, I think that gives you even a better perspective. So let's talk about the recently concluded trade talks between the U.S. and China that took place in Beijing. The reports we're getting here in the U.S. are that they were, very positive. That
Indeed.
There was some positive movement. Is that what you're hearing?
Yeah, exactly. I think that both the two countries and the market as well are more optimistic than before. I think that both countries have demonstrated the common will to reach a deal, one kind or another, before the 100 deadline expires, probably in March, I guess. So I think that since the two leaders, President Trump and Xi, agreed to a trade ceasefire in Argentina in December, the two sides have been pretty busy, and I believe that probably after the Beijing talk, a Chinese delegation will head for the U.S. in Washington to have another round of talk. And it's one positive sign is that the deputy premier Liu He, he is a top political advisor to President Xi. He showed up on the first day of the meeting. That was a nice surprise, and which really is a very positive gesture that a member of the top Chinese leadership is personally involved in the talks with the U.S. side. So I think that last time we also discussed the trade war, the tariff war between the two countries. China has been feeling the pain, and the U.S. as well. So I think Trump has somehow realized that the U.S. economy may sooner or later also suffer from the stalemate. And I think one positive sign is that he doesn't have to face another midterm election until 2020. So he simply no longer has the incentive to use the trade war to his own advantage. There is no election issue for him. So he has already demonstrated to his voters that his resolve to pursue the matter. And now, since the ball is rolling, the two sides are sitting down on the negotiating table to talk, and a deal is on the horizon, then Trump can take all the credit, from the matter.
Yeah, you mentioned the Chinese economy is hurting, and I think some of that's probably started even before the trade war with the U.S., correct? But has it become worse because of the trade war?
Of course, obviously. The trade war has somehow worsened the China slowdown. The Chinese economy has been cooling since 2015 or 2016. It has run into some structural problems, and the trade war has been a has been more than the last straw on the camel, or the other way we say that, because the Chinese economy still depends substantially on exports to the U.S. and the U.S. is China's number one export market. So especially those export-oriented provinces like Guangdong, Shanghai, Zhejiang, these wealthy provinces, they are the the pillar of Beijing's physical income. So they are feeling the pain, they are taking the beating. So the Chinese economy is on its downhill road. And one sign is that actually the Chinese people are buying far less new cars in 2018 than a year ago. That is a really worrying sign because automobile industry is one of the pillars supporting the economy. And people have been talking about the fancy term that consumption downgrading, that people are no longer buying these fancy luxury goods. They are no longer buying these sedans or marks. They are just focusing on the daily necessities because it's all about people's perception, people's outlook, people's confidence that probably the economy may cool down a little bit further. So they need to prepare for the rainy days. And, the crowd is gathering. So people are worried. Even though probably, on the other hand, I think that China is a huge country. So it does have room for maneuver. It has a huge, massive domestic consumption market. So when export is slowing down, Beijing really has to find another way to boost domestic consumption to drive the economy, and it is exactly doing that. With that, it has cut the triple R, so to let out more liquidity to the market, to require mandate the state lenders to give more credit to SMEs. So there are positive signs. I think that there won't be a crushing meltdown of the Chinese economy, but I think given the sheer size of the economy, the speed, the slowing down is normal. It's only about the question whether China can sustain a 6% growth. That's a very vital threshold. The speed below 6% should be worrisome. I think that's the bottom line.
So the Chinese appear to be willing to compromise and make some concessions in this dispute. As you and I talked before, are they going to follow through on these promises?
Well, although I was born in China and legally I'm still working in China because nowadays Hong Kong is part of China, but it's not part of China given the weird arrangement, one country, two systems. I think that given its past, the Communist Party has a seedy reputation when it comes to honoring its whole host of promises. On the domestic front, it promised the democracy for its people. Back in 70 years ago, this year marks the 70th anniversary of the Communist China since 1949. So 70 years ago, Mao Zedong, the founding father of China, he promised that we'll have a free, fair election, that people will pick their leaders. The Communist Party won't be the ruling party. There won't be any authoritarian regime. But that's not the case. It also promised, even in the context of Hong Kong, it also promised Hong Kong high degree of autonomy or all these sorts of free elections. But look at Hong Kong nowadays. One country, two systems has been reduced to something that exists on paper only. So I think personally, for Beijing, promises are meant to be broken. Just as what we have seen since 2001, since China joined the WTO, it promised this, promised that, IP protection, fair market access, level playing field, blah blah blah. But it's literally went back on all its words. So I think the tricky point now is that China will promise a lot again this time during the talks, even inside this a deal, an agreement. So it really depends whether China has the determination to put its words into action, to honor its promises, and it also depends on Trump's determination to pursue the matter. And I think Trump has demonstrated that he is that serious about all these goals. Even look at the war along the Mexican border. He is that serious about his election promises, even despite all the commotion from the Democratic Party, the government shutdown. So I think that unlike his predecessors, unlike Obama, unlike George Bush, or unlike Bill Clinton agreed to all these Beijing's promise back in the end of 1990s, when the two sides negotiated a very good deal, probably just like a new deal that we are expecting in a few weeks' time. So while we see a repetition of the history, while we see that U.S. being fooled again, I don't think so. As long as Trump is the president, I think Beijing has to honor its pledges to some degree. So it's really about a matter of the extent that how many promises Beijing are going to honor. Beijing will honor some, but I'm pretty sure that some core issues Beijing will find some way to work around or make excuses for its many delayed reforms.
Well, Frank, it's been good to talk to you again. I appreciate your insight and your perspective on these issues, and I will check back with you again
Sure.
as these trade talks continue and beyond. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.